Okay, this lesson is going to be on the human excretory or urinary system. Keep in mind, we have already chatted about another excretory system in your body, and that is the respiratory system. So even though, of course, it is responsible for bringing oxygen into your body, your respiratory system also gets rid of the waste that is produced in every cell in your body through the process of cellular respiration, and that is carbon dioxide. And we also talked about the fact that in addition to eliminating this waste, this is also going to regulate the pH of your blood or acid-base homeostasis. So I mention that because the excretory system that we're talking about here, it is also going to be responsible for getting rid of waste. In this case, it's not carbon dioxide, but it is referred to as nitrogenous waste. I'll just put an N for nitrogen. Nitrogenous wastes. So these are wastes that are produced through the breakdown of nucleic acids and proteins in your body. This nitrogen initially typically formed in this form here, ammonia gas, very toxic. So in our bodies, it's converted into a different nitrogenous waste, and that nitrogenous waste is urea. And it is then urea, as we will see, that is going to be excreted through our excretory or urinary system. So in addition to getting rid of nitrogenous wastes, a couple of other things that your excretory system is going to do. It's also going to be responsible, as with the respiratory system, for pH or acid-base homeostasis. So maintaining a relatively constant pH, and in the case of our bodies, that's a relatively neutral pH. That is also going to be a function of the excretory system. And another one is referred to as osmoregulation. So this again does have to do with homeostasis, only in the case of osmoregulation, what we're taking a look at is the fine balance between the amount of water in your body and the amount of solutes that we find in your body as well. Really only one way that you do take, well, both water and solutes or salts into your body, and that is through your digestive system. Various different ways that you can get rid of it. You can get rid of water, of course, simply through exhaling. You can get rid of water and solutes or salts through perspiration, and you can also get rid of them through the digestive system and the one that we're talking about here, the excretory system as well. So this first slide that I am showing you here, it does have the macroscopic structures associated with the excretory system. So it does involve the kidneys that we find on either side of your body in your lower back region. Coming from each one of the kidneys that, as we will see, are going to be producing the urine. This urine is then going to travel through a single ureter or ureter that's coming from each one of the kidneys, going toward a single urinary bladder. Remember, we did come across another kind of bladder before. This one here is associated with the urinary system, and for that reason, it is referred to as the urinary bladder as opposed to that previous one that we saw with the digestive system, which of course was the gallbladder. So in the bladder is where the urine is going to be stored till eventually is going to be excreted out of the body, and that is passing out through a single tube that is referred to as the urethra. Your kidneys do supply a very, very rich blood supply, so that blood supply is coming in from what are called the renal arteries. And in fact, it's somewhere on the order about 20% of your blood at rest that is being pumped by your heart that is directed toward your two kidneys. After that blood goes to the kidneys through the arteries, it's then going to travel out through the renal veins, and those renal veins will eventually take the blood back to the right-hand side of the heart, up through the vena cava and into the right atrium. So again, in red, it's showing the renal arteries. These ones here are then going to be the renal veins. This second slide is showing a cross-section through the kidneys, and in the kidneys we can identify several different kind of general areas around the outside here. It is referred to as the cortex or the renal cortex, which is the outer part of the kidneys, a little bit closer to the center, around in this region here. We have the medulla or the renal medulla. And then right in the center, eventually where the urine as it has here is going to collect, this is referred to as the renal pelvis. So these are all, for the most part, macroscopic structures, macroscopic regions of the kidney. But then we're taking a look at kind of a pie wedge shape going through the cortex and into the renal medulla as well. And what we can see now at this enlarged picture on the right-hand side is the functional unit of the kidneys. You have about 1 million of these inside each one of your kidneys, and that's referred to as the nephron. So we'll talk in a little bit more detail about the different parts of the nephron and the function of the different parts of the nephron, but overall, the purpose is to eventually generate the urine, which is going to go from the kidneys out through the renal pelvis into the ureter, and again from the ureter into the urinary bladder, and eventually the urethra. So again, in this picture here, we can see that a portion of the nephron, it is going to be in the renal cortex, and another portion of the nephron, this portion here, is going to be in the renal medulla. So this nicely colored picture here, it does show us the various different regions of the nephron. So I'll kind of go through them in terms of their names initially from beginning to end. So the beginning of the nephron, the first part of the nephron, it is referred to as Bowman's capsule. And what we'll see is that Bowman's capsule is a semi-permeable membrane. It allows some things to pass through, other things not. More or less, it is a molecular sieve, which is allowing smaller things to pass through, but not larger things. So that is the first part of the nephron. From there, what we now have inside of the nephron is referred to as the filtrate. And this filtrate is kind of similar in appearance and in terms of many of the materials that you find in it to the blood plasma. So from the Bowman's capsule, the second region that it does go into is referred to as the proximal convoluted tubule that we see in purple here. From there, this is going to be in the adrenal cortex, but then it's going to drop down into the medulla. So as it drops down into the medulla, this loop that we see here that initially goes down, it is called the descending portion of the loop. And then this portion here is the ascending portion of the loop, and this is the loop of Henle. So that is the third region of the nephron. From there, it's going to go to the tubule that is further away from Bowman's capsule, and because it is further away, it is referred to as distal, the distal tubule. This would be the fourth major region of the nephron where the filtrate goes into. And then from several different nephrons, so we can see in this picture here, it comes in from this nephron, but from some other nephrons as well. Eventually, a bunch of what is now considered to be the urine is going to be accumulating in the collecting duct. That'll be our number 5. And from there, it's going to travel into that renal pelvis. So in each one of these different regions, there are different processes that are taking place. Initially at Bowman's capsule, I mentioned that it's a filter, it's a semi-permeable membrane, and what it is filtering is the blood. So the blood capillaries that are surrounded by Bowman's capsule. You can think of Bowman's capsule as a cup-shaped structure. It's going to surround a very permeable region of capillaries, and these very permeable capillaries, they are referred to as the glomerulus when we're talking singular, or glomeruli if we're talking about more than one. So it does show blood vessels here as well. It shows us blood that is coming into the glomerulus. Then it's going to be filtered at Bowman's capsule. And then again, this is the very permeable capillary bed. It's going to come back out again. And then we just sort of see that it weaves all the way around other parts of the nephron as well. In this picture here, what it is showing in yellow, this is referred to as the filtrate. So once we are talking about the contents inside of the nephron, regardless of whether it's at the beginning or the end, it is referred to as the filtrate, and eventually at the end of the nephron, we can then refer to it simply as the urine. So I mentioned this blood supply that's coming in. A blood supply comes into the glomerulus. This is the glomerulus here, the very permeable capillaries. It comes in through what is referred to as the afferent arterioles. They bring the blood into the glomerulus. It is the efferent arterioles that then takes the blood out of the glomerulus. So as the blood comes in, it is under a fairly high pressure, and this high pressure is going to force a whole bunch of the materials that you do find in the blood, in the plasma. It's going to force them out of these permeable capillaries, the glomeruli, and it's going to force them through Bowman's capsule and to become part of the filtrate. So just like any filter, what is going to happen is larger things will not pass through, or they shouldn't pass through, but smaller things will. So this diagram here very nicely shows the processes that are involved in the formation and eventually elimination of the urine. So the first one is filtration. That is what is taking place at this interface between the glomerulus and Bowman's capsule. And in the next slide, we'll take a look at exactly, again, what is being filtered. So now again in yellow we do have the filtrate, but some other things are now going to happen at various different regions along the length of the nephron. So one of them, labeled number 2 on here, is the process of reabsorption. So not absorption. Absorption is what takes place primarily in your small intestine, where you take the broken down monomers from food and move them across the lining of your gut and into your blood. Here we're moving things into the blood, but it's coming from the filtrate, it's coming from the nephron. So this is specifically referred to as a reabsorption. So as we'll see, reabsorption is necessary because there are a whole bunch of things that pass through Bowman's capsule that are actually quite useful, and we need to recover them. We need to return them to the blood. We don't want them to end up being excreted from the body as part of the urine. The next one that we do have on here, labeled as number 3, it's really the opposite in terms of direction anyway, of reabsorption, and it is called secretion. So now there are some additional things still in the blood. So things like toxins and hydrogen ions that we'll see, that we want to take even more of it that wasn't filtered at Bowman's capsule. We want to add more of it from the blood and into the nephron to become part of the filtrate and eventually the urine as well. So that is the process of secretion. And then the final one here, after that urine does go from the collecting ducts, from the renal pelvis of the kidney, eventually to the urinary bladder and to get it out of the body, well, that is the fourth one here, referred to as excretion. So number 4, and that is the urine that is actually being eliminated from the body. This picture shows us a more detailed picture of what exactly is going on in terms of reabsorption and secretion, and 2 different processes that are involved. With the red arrows, it is showing active transport. In other words, ATP is required, and we're moving things against the concentration gradient. And the other one shown in blue is passive transport. In this case, it's going down its concentration gradient, and there is no energy or ATP that is required for this process. So first of all, what is going on right at this interface between the glomerulus and Bowman's capsule? Again, that is filtration. So we do have blood that is coming into these permeable blood vessels. That again would be the afferent arterioles. It's going away from the glomerulus through the efferent arterioles. But then we have Bowman's capsule, which is surrounding this very permeable capillary bed, the glomerulus, and that's where the filtration is taking place. So what we see in this picture here, the pale blue color, that is the filtrate. So what do we initially have in the filtrate? Things that are small enough to pass through the filter. What things don't pass through the filter, at least they shouldn't pass through the filter and they should remain in the blood, that includes the formed elements in the blood. So the red blood cells, the white blood cells, the platelets, large proteins and fats, they are not filtered. They do not become part of the filtrate. They should not end up in the urine. They should remain in the blood. Things that pass through: water, salts like sodium and chloride. This is bicarbonate ions, hydrogen ions or protons, wastes, glucose, other monosaccharides, amino acids, drugs. All of these can pass through the filter at Bowman's capsule. But if we take a look at this list of things that pass through Bowman's capsule, there are some that we will probably definitely want to get rid of. This one here is the nitrogenous waste. We want to get rid of that. Hydrogen ions, if they accumulate, that would lower the pH of the blood, making it more acidic. You want to get rid of that. Drugs, you probably want to get rid of, well, some of those as well if the concentration is too high, but other things are actually quite useful, and you do want to eventually recover them and return them to the blood. So that includes water. It includes sodium and chloride. It includes bicarbonate. It includes what you use for fuel, the monosaccharides. It includes what you use to make proteins, which are the amino acids. So all of these, they are going to be pulled back. They're going to be recovered. So this picture does show us that already right away, just after Bowman's capsule, in the next portion, the proximal tubule, we already do have some reabsorption that is taking place. Some of it is active. So actively reabsorbing sodium and chloride, actively reabsorbing nutrients like the glucose, the fructose, galactose, monosaccharides, and all of the amino acids. We also have the passive reabsorption of bicarbonate, water, and potassium ions. In the proximal tubule as well, we also have secretion taking place. So remember, secretion is the opposite. So all of these arrows that we see, they are coming and going to and from the blood. So from the nephron, these nutrients and the sodium chloride and the water and the bicarbonate, all of it is going into the blood. When we take a look at these ones at the bottom, the hydrogen ions and the ammonium ions, they're coming from the blood and you're adding it to the filtrate. So whereas these processes at the top, this is going to be the reabsorption. These ones at the bottom here, this is going to be the secretion that is taking place here. So remember that ammonia, that is one of the nitrogenous wastes, so you do want to get rid of those. And the hydrogen ions, if they accumulate, they will make the blood more acidic, so you want to add more of that to the filtrate to eliminate it. And that is taking place, again, through this process of secretion. So if we just go through the remainder of the regions of the nephron, we'll see that, again, that there's more secretion and reabsorption that is taking place. It's really water all along the length that's being reabsorbed. So we had water passively reabsorbed in the proximal tubule at various different locations of the loop of Henle, especially the descending loop that we see here. It's reabsorbed in the distal tubule, and there's a bunch of it that's also finally reabsorbed in the collecting duct as well. Kind of the same thing with sodium chloride. In some cases, it's going to be actively reabsorbed. We did see that at the beginning in the proximal tubule. It's going to be actively reabsorbed in the upper portion of the ascending loop of Henle, but here we see that it's passively reabsorbed a little bit lower down. Actively reabsorbed in the distal tubule, and again we have the active reabsorption. So water and the sodium really reabsorbed all the way after Bowman's capsule, all throughout the length of the nephron, and even as we do go into the collecting duct as well. We see also in terms of the secretion that we have some more hydrogen ions that are added a little bit later, once again maintaining the acid-base balance. And for the most part, the nitrogenous wastes, they are going to end up in the filtrate, but this is kind of an interesting one here. You actually reabsorb the urea at the latter part of the collecting duct, and the idea here is to really increase the solute concentration inside of the medulla portion of the kidney, medulla portion right here. And what that is actually going to do is it's going to draw more sodium chloride and more water out of the nephron and return it to the blood. But eventually that urea will end up as part of the filtrate and will be excreted through the urine. Now, all of this does not happen without some hormonal signals that are going to be telling your nephrons to absorb, especially the water, and also regulate some of the salts as well, the potassium, the sodium, and the chloride. And the two hormones that you do need to know about, this one here, ADH, which stands for antidiuretic hormone, it for the most part has to do with water homeostasis. It controls the amount of water that is reabsorbed. And the other one here, also responsible for osmoregulation. These two hormones actually go hand in hand, but we usually think of this one as being more specific for sodium homeostasis, the amount of salt or sodium that you do have in your body. So first of all, with the ADH, the antidiuretic hormone, again, it is really trying to control the blood osmolarity, which is the concentration of solute versus the concentration of water. So there's an ideal concentration, and that is homeostasis. If for some reason there is more solute than the water, that increases what is referred to as the osmotic pressure. And now what you need to do is you need to take in more water and hold on to whatever water that you have. So the stimulus for the production of this hormone, antidiuretic hormone, is osmoreceptors in a region of your brain called the hypothalamus. Osmoreceptors are continually measuring what is the solute water concentration in your body. And if there is an increase in the amount of solute relative to the water, what you need to do is hold on to whatever water that you have. So that is really the function of antidiuretic hormone. It is produced by your hypothalamus. It's released by a gland down below the hypothalamus called the pituitary gland. Hormones circulate through your blood. This one here, its target tissue are the tubules of your kidneys, specifically the distal tubules and the collecting ducts. And what do? They cause water reabsorption. So in order for the walls of the tubules to be permeable to water, in order for reabsorption to take place, this hormone here does need to be produced. If it is not produced, if its production is blocked, then water cannot be reabsorbed, and that water would, of course, then end up in the urine. So the ADH is going to tell your body to hold on to water by reabsorbing it, but to eventually bring your body back to homeostasis, probably what you're also going to have is the ingestion of water to increase the amount of water that is coming into your body. So big thing to remember, ADH is specific for water reabsorption. The other hormone, aldosterone, aldosterone is produced by a gland which actually sits on top of your kidneys, and it is called the adrenal gland. And specifically, aldosterone is produced by the outer region, and it is called the adrenal cortex. So the aldosterone, again, is dealing with homeostasis. And in this case, the homeostasis does have to do with the salt, the sodium in particular. But the reason why this hormone is usually stimulated to be produced and released by the adrenal cortex is that someone does have a drop in blood volume and a drop in blood pressure. So in order to bring that blood volume and blood pressure back up again, what your body is going to try and do is hold on to whatever solute and water it can. As a general rule, wherever the solute goes, the water will follow. So if you're holding on to solute like sodium, you're going to hold on to the water as well. So if there is a drop in blood volume and blood pressure, you don't need to know about all of these details here, but what you do need to know is that is going to be the stimulus for the adrenal gland, the adrenal cortex, to increase the production of aldosterone. What does aldosterone do? Specifically, increase the sodium reabsorption. Usually to get the water reabsorbed, you also need to have the ADH that is produced along with the aldosterone. So these two hormones typically do go hand in hand, but the aldosterone specific for the reabsorption of sodium. So if you are reabsorbing it, holding on to the water as well, and probably also ingesting some water. Hopefully that is enough to eventually bring you back to homeostasis in terms of the blood volume and the blood pressure as well.